When Japanese soldiers arrived at American POW camps in 1944, something unexpected happened. The enemy didn't break them with politics. They broke them with hamburgers and Coca-Cola. Arrival at Camp McCoy. When the train doors opened in Wisconsin's bitter cold, Japanese prisoners stepped onto frozen ground, blinking against harsh winter light. Their uniforms hung in tatters, held together with scraps of fabric and determination. Hunger carved deep lines in their faces, hollow cheeks, exhausted eyes, cracked lips from weeks of short rations. Every man had learned the same brutal lesson during training. Capture was the ultimate disgrace, worse than death itself. They'd been told Americans would torture them without mercy, that starvation and humiliation awaited anyone foolish enough to surrender. Many expected to be executed the moment they left the train. Instead, they saw rows of wooden barracks against white snow, guard towers, barbed wire, sentries with rifles. But the atmosphere was different than imagined. There was order here, a strange routine. Trucks moved through camp roads. Smoke rose from kitchen chimneys, carrying smells of cooking food, rich, heavy food unlike anything they'd eaten in months. Some prisoners exchanged nervous glances. Others kept their heads down, hiding any trace of curiosity. Guards shouted commands in sharp English. The prisoners understood little, but the tone was firm, not savage. Interpreters barked instructions. Line up, move forward, stay in formation. Then they saw something that shocked them. Red Cross officials with clipboards, observing everything. Back home, they'd been told America ignored international treaties, yet here were neutral observers ensuring rules were followed. Could this be real? The first shock. Medical care. The intake process was mechanical, but shockingly humane. Men were deloused, their lice-infested uniforms burned. Medical personnel checked for fever, malnutrition, broken bones. One soldier with a bandaged arm expected to be ignored, left to suffer. Instead, an American medic unwrapped the wound, cleaned it carefully, and dressed it with fresh gauze. The soldier sat frozen, unable to reconcile this act of care with everything he'd been taught about the barbaric enemy. One prisoner whispered in disbelief, "Why would they do this? We are nothing to them." Another shook his head. It must be a trick. Wait, fear lingered with every step. Yet each hour revealed something stranger, an adherence to the Geneva Convention they'd heard whispered about but never believed would matter. After registration, they were marched to their quarters. The barracks were rough but heated with stoves, lined with bunks, stocked with wool blankets. It wasn't freedom, but it was shelter. A few prisoners sat heavily on mattresses, testing them with their palms, as if the softness might vanish. Yes, there were guards and barbed wire constant reminders this was captivity. But inside, something felt different. The camp ran like a machine, but not like a dungeon. The contrast gnawed at them. All their lives, they'd been taught that surrender meant degradation, that captivity would reduce them to animals. But at Camp McCoy, the first day painted a different picture. A guard helping a sick man steady himself, a medic wrapping gauze with care. Red Cross representatives ensuring fair treatment. They didn't relax. Suspicion lived in their chests like a second heartbeat. But as night came and they lay under real blankets, they couldn't help but wonder. Maybe the greatest shock wasn't captivity itself, but how different it looked from the nightmare they'd prepared for. But the true shock wouldn't come with rules or barracks. It would come on a tray in the mess hall, carried by the smell of meat and the hiss of soda bottles. The breaking point, hamburgers and Coca-Cola. The next morning, they woke not to blows or insults, but to a bugle call. The sound was familiar. They'd heard it in their own camps back in Japan. For a moment, some forgot where they were. Then reality returned with the clank of boots and English voices. They were ordered into formation, roll called, and directed toward the mess hall. Fear sat heavy in their chests. Many expected food would be withheld, or they'd be fed scraps unfit for animals. Hunger had been their constant companion. Meals had dwindled to bowls of watery rice, sometimes barley, occasionally a few pickled vegetables. Meat was rare, sugar almost mythical. But first came procedures. A Red Cross representative addressed them through an interpreter, explaining their rights under the Geneva Convention. They would be fed, housed, allowed to write letters home. They would work, but only under certain conditions. They would not be abused. Regular visits from neutral officials would ensure compliance. The words were met with disbelief. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others whispered, unconvinced. One soldier muttered, "They speak of rights, but we are captives. Why would they bother?" The interpreter paused. "These are not promises. These are rules. For you, for them, they are binding." Thanks for watching. After that came thorough medical checks. Doctors examined thin wrists, checked teeth, measured blood pressure. Many prisoners were severely underweight. Americans shook their heads quietly at the numbers, but no one mocked them. A corporal even handed out vitamins, small, chalky tablets that puzzled the men. Medicine for enemies? It was almost insulting in its kindness. By afternoon, they received fresh clothes, plain uniforms, marked with large PW letters. The garments fit better than their torn remnants from the field. Some prisoners hesitated, as though each stitch was a surrender of identity. Others embraced the warmth, shivering less. As Wisconsin wind pushed through the barracks, the guards themselves were another surprise. Yes, they were armed and watchful, but they didn't spit or strike prisoners for moving slowly. When an elderly prisoner stumbled on ice, a guard reached down and pulled him up by the arm. No kick, no sneer. Just a curt nod before walking on. It was deeply confusing. That night, conversations ran low and heavy in the barracks. "Can you believe them?" one man asked, staring at ceiling beams. "They speak of rules as though this is an arrangement." "They must be pretending," another replied, "to trap us, to make us speak." And yet, when silence fell, the smell from the kitchens carried over again. Thick, rich, fatty. Not the sour, thin soups they knew, but something whole, something filling. Their stomachs growled involuntarily, betraying them. The meal that changed everything. The line moved slowly in the mess hall. Steam rose from trays behind the counter, carrying a scent so foreign that many couldn't place it. Rich, heavy, smoky. Meat. Yes, but not like the dried fish or tiny cuts they once ate. This was thicker, heartier, closer to luxury. The prisoners clutched their tin trays like shields, waiting for humiliation. Perhaps scraps would be thrown at them. Perhaps spoiled food would be served with mockery. Then the first soldier stepped forward. An American cook, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dropped a hot patty onto a bun with a spatula. He added fried potatoes on the side. Finally, he reached for a glass bottle, sweating with condensation, popped the cap, and slid it onto the tray. The red script on the label was unfamiliar, almost decorative. The Japanese soldier stared at his tray as if it were a trick. His hand trembled. "Move along," the cook said flatly. Behind him, others leaned to glimpse what had been given. Whispers rippled down the line. "Meat. They're giving us meat." As more trays filled, disbelief deepened. The bun was soft to the touch, the potatoes fried golden, and the bottle Coca-Cola, a guard explained, curtly fizzed as though alive. In the corner of the hall, prisoners sat at long wooden tables. They eyed the food cautiously, suspiciously, like men who had stumbled into forbidden territory. A few brought the bottle to their lips. The sweetness exploded first, then the burn of carbonation in their throats. Some gagged, coughing from shock. Others widened their eyes in astonishment. One man laughed an uncontrolled burst that startled his neighbors. Another covered his mouth and lowered his head, shoulders shaking, caught between laughter and tears. A thin soldier, ribs visible even under his new uniform, lifted his hamburger with both hands as though it might fall apart. He sniffed it, then bit in. Grease ran down his chin. He froze, chewing slowly, as if each bite might vanish if he moved too quickly. Then he lowered his face, hiding the tears that welled up. "Are you all right?" his bunkmate asked. The man swallowed hard. "I had forgotten the taste of fat." At another table, two prisoners debated quietly. "They want to make us weak," one argued. "They fatten us so we forget our cause." Or, his companion said slowly, "They simply eat like this every day." That idea was harder to swallow than the food itself. The mess hall filled with low sounds, chewing, muffled laughter, an occasional sob quickly hidden. For men who had lived through the hunger of Guadalcanal and Saipan, who had endured failing supply lines on the home islands, the meal was more than nourishment. It was an assault on their assumptions. One prisoner later whispered that the sweetness of Coca-Cola felt like a dream gone wrong, too gentle to belong in war. The Americans serving the food noticed nothing extraordinary. To them, it was routine. They ate the same hamburgers and fries, washed them down with the same Coke, and thought nothing of it. For the guards and cooks, feeding prisoners was procedure. But for the prisoners themselves, it was as if they had crossed into another reality. What shook them most was not the abundance, but the normality. The Americans weren't celebrating or taunting. This wasn't a feast meant to impress. It was simply Tuesday dinner. That contrast hit harder than any insult could have. Here were men who had fought ferociously, who had been told America was starving, decadent, on the brink of collapse. Yet in captivity, they were eating better than they had as free soldiers of the empire. The shame was sharp, but the relief was sharper still. By the time trays were emptied and bottles stood drained on tables, the prisoners sat back in silence. Some folded their hands as if in prayer. Others stared blankly at walls, trying to process what had just happened. That night, lying on bunks under wool blankets, the memory of Hamburgers and Coca-Cola stayed with them, not just as food, but as proof. Proof that their enemy lived in a different world. One where sweetness could be wasted on prisoners. One where meat was so common, it could be shaped into patties and handed out without thought. Life inside the wire. The shock of that first meal lingered, but it didn't erase the reality of captivity. Each morning, prisoners woke to roll call, boots crunching in frost, rifles pointed from towers above. The barbed wire was always there, cutting across the horizon, reminding them this life was still a prison. Inside the wire, routine ruled everything. After breakfast, prisoners were divided into groups. Some shoveled snow from roads, others cut wood or helped on nearby farms under guard supervision. The work was steady, not brutal. Many were surprised they weren't being used to exhaustion. Instead, they were paid small wages in camp coupons, which could be exchanged at the camp canteen for toiletries, writing paper, even candy or cigarettes. One afternoon, a Japanese soldier held up a chocolate bar he'd purchased with his coupons. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it. "In Japan," he murmured to a fellow prisoner, "this is medicine. Here they give it away like it is nothing." His friend shook his head in disbelief. The canteen itself was another shock. Prisoners watched American soldiers come and go, chatting casually, buying Coke or chewing gum, joking with the clerk. The casualness was almost unbearable. War was raging across the world, yet here in Wisconsin, Americans seemed to live as though abundance would never run dry. Still, the daily structure pressed down in a different way. There was no fighting, no advancing, no dying comrades to bury. Instead, monotony. Wake, work, eat, sleep. The mind, once consumed by survival, now had space to wander. And with wandering came longing. Letters became lifelines. The camp allowed each prisoner to write 2 letters and 4 postcards per month, heavily censored but precious. Men hunched over tables, scratching out words with pencils, trying to capture their homes in ink. "I am alive" was often all they could manage. Some received letters back thin envelopes with familiar handwriting. Others received none. For those men, silence grew heavier with each passing week. English classes were offered in the evenings. A few curious prisoners attended, repeating words slowly. Bread, table, window. Others scoffed, insisting there was no use in learning the enemy's tongue. But even the skeptics listened from their bunks, ears pricking at the strange rhythm of the words. There were moments of unexpected contact. A guard at a worksite once asked a prisoner, "Do you miss rice?" The interpreter relayed the question. The prisoner laughed bitterly and answered in Japanese, "Rice is a memory." When the reply was translated, the guard grew quiet, perhaps realizing the weight behind the words. Not all interactions were gentle. Suspicion lingered. Some guards treated prisoners with coldness, never speaking beyond commands. And within the barracks, arguments broke out among the prisoners themselves. Some clung fiercely to the idea that Japan would triumph, that captivity would end in victory. Others, worn down by what they'd seen, muttered that defeat was inevitable. One night, 2 men argued so loudly that a guard had to intervene. "You dishonor our homeland when you speak of defeat," one prisoner shouted. "And you dishonor reason by denying what is before your eyes," the other snapped back. The guard silenced them, but the tension remained. Even in the middle of America, the war lived inside their minds. Yet life in camp also produced small human routines. Prisoners carved wooden toys during free hours, played improvised games, or sat together telling stories of home. The smell of the mess hall never ceased to haunt them, but at least it was steady 3 meals a day, no matter what. That fact alone set this captivity apart from the jungle trenches and crumbling islands they'd come from. In the barracks at night, silence often fell quickly after lights out. But every so often, someone whispered into the dark, "What do you think your family eats tonight?" The answers never came, just sighs and the shifting of blankets. Moments of humanity. For weeks, the camp ran like clockwork. Guards gave orders. Prisoners followed. Meals came on schedule. The rhythm was predictable, even dull. But in between those routines, small cracks opened where humanity slipped through. Moments that neither side could have imagined when the war began. It often started with language. Few Japanese prisoners spoke English beyond a handful of words, and most Americans knew no Japanese at all. Commands were given through interpreters or gestures. Yet necessity pushed both sides to improvise. A guard might point at a shovel and bark, "Work." A prisoner, catching the sound, would repeat it awkwardly under his breath, "Waku." Soon others did the same, laughing quietly at their clumsy attempts. One evening during an English class, an American instructor wrote the word family on the chalkboard. He asked for a volunteer to say it aloud. A prisoner stood, hesitated, then said, "Famray." The class burst into laughter, not cruel but genuine. Even the teacher smiled. The prisoner smiled too, his face softening for the first time in weeks. In that instant, the label of enemy gave way to something more ordinary. Men trying to bridge a gap. Food became a kind of common ground again. On rare occasions, guards shared cigarettes or chewing gum with prisoners during work details. The gum baffled them. One man chewed for a few minutes, then swallowed it whole. The Americans roared with laughter, shaking their heads, trying to explain. Soon, gum became a small symbol of exchange, a guard offering, a prisoner accepting with a stiff bow. There were also clashes. On a farm outside the camp where POWs worked clearing fields, an American farmer watched them closely. His son had been killed in the Pacific, and resentment boiled in his stare. When one prisoner bent to pick up a dropped tool, the farmer spat on the ground near his feet. The guard escorting the work crew noticed, said nothing, but walked closer. The tension hung in the cold air, unspoken but raw. The farmer turned away, muttering, "Should have left them to starve." That moment spread quickly among the prisoners when they returned to camp. "Not all Americans follow their rules," one said grimly. His bunkmate replied, "Of course not. They are men like us. Some will hate, some will not." Inside the wire, friendships sometimes grew where no one expected them. A young guard named Miller, barely 20, with a soft accent from Illinois, often lingered near the barracks after duty. He carried photographs of his family, showing them to prisoners who gathered near the fence. They didn't understand his words, but they understood the faces: a mother, a father, two small sisters. In turn, prisoners traced shapes in the dirt, sketching their own homes, their villages, their wives waiting oceans away. It wasn't dialogue in words, but dialogue in images. One evening Miller managed to say slowly, "Mother, father, sisters." He pointed to the photos. A prisoner nodded, touched his chest, and said in Japanese, "Haha, chichi, imoto." The exchange lasted only moments before another guard ordered Miller away. But the seed was planted. They had spoken across the chasm, if only for an instant. Still, culture ran deep, and suspicion ran deeper. Among the Japanese, loyalty to the emperor was not erased by hamburgers or Coca-Cola. Some whispered warnings against softening. They accused fellow prisoners who attended English classes of betraying their honor. In the dim light of the barracks, arguments flared. Was survival worth adaptation? Or did every borrowed word, every moment of laughter with a guard, chip away at who they were? One prisoner wrote secretly in his diary, "We were told Americans were animals, yet they share their gum. They heal our wounds. Which is the lie? Which is the truth?" The contradictions gnawed at them. For some, the kindness of guards felt like humiliation, a reminder that they lived better as captives than their families did back home. For others, those same moments hinted at something uncomfortable but undeniable. The enemy was not faceless. One snowy night, as lights flickered out across the camp, a prisoner whispered to his bunkmate, "If we survive this war, what will we tell our children? That our enemy fed us? That he gave us blankets? That he smiled at us?" The bunkmate stayed silent for a long time before answering softly, "We will tell them the truth, even if it shames us." The weight of contradictions. By winter of 1945, The rhythms of Camp McCoy had settled into something the prisoners could not have imagined when they first stepped off the train. Hunger no longer carved their faces as sharply. Work, though tiring, didn't break their bodies. Some even dared to ask guards how to spell English words. On the surface, life looked manageable. Yet underneath ran a deep conflict, one that grew sharper as weeks turned to months. How could they reconcile this treatment with the hatred and loyalty they still carried in their hearts? Every night, debates flared in the barracks. Some argued fiercely that this was all deception, that America only pretended to treat prisoners well to weaken them, to steal their spirit before repatriation. One man stood up one night, voice harsh. "Do not be fooled. Our emperor demands strength, not comfort. Every hamburger you swallow is a betrayal." Others, weary of suffering, pushed back. "We are alive," one countered. "And if survival is betrayal, then what did dying hungry on Saipan achieve?" Silence followed those words. Silence and shame. Letters from home made the contradictions sting even sharper. When a prisoner received word that his family in Osaka survived on boiled weeds and scraps of barley, he held the paper in shaking hands while the smell of roast beef drifted from the mess hall. The gulf between his life as a prisoner and theirs as civilians under bombing raids became unbearable. "I eat like a soldier," he confessed quietly, "while my children starve." It wasn't only food. Warmth itself became a symbol. In barracks heated by stoves, with wool blankets and sturdy boots, the men remembered family shivering back in wooden houses, with glass shattered from air raids. Captivity offered them safety, yet it deepened their guilt. Some prisoners clung harder to propaganda, repeating it like prayers. America was decadent, hollow, ready to collapse. But the evidence around them mocked those words. In the camp, Coca-Cola bottles arrived by the crate. Cigarettes were available not just for soldiers, but for prisoners. Work crews saw American farmers with tractors, barns full of livestock, fields that seemed endless. Abundance here was not fantasy, it was normal. One guard, overhearing a prisoner remark on the overflowing fields, said simply, "This is only Wisconsin, you should see Illinois." The prisoner lowered his eyes, ashamed of the envy burning in him. The contradictions broke some men quietly. One evening, a prisoner whispered through tears, "I believed Japan was the center of the world, but now I see. Perhaps we are only one small island." His bunkmate scolded him, warned him never to speak such treason aloud. But the thought had been voiced, and thoughts cannot be taken back. Religion added another layer. Some prisoners gathered in hushed circles, reciting prayers to ancestors, clinging to tradition. Others watched American chaplains lead services for their own men, and curiosity flickered. A few even attended, if only to sit in the warmth of the chapel. They didn't understand the hymns, but they recognized the act of faith. Different gods, different rituals, but the same human hunger for hope. Perhaps the most painful contradiction came during Red Cross inspections. The officials asked prisoners if they were treated well. Most answered yes, because it was true. But afterward, in the barracks, shame swept over them. We admit our enemy treats us fairly, while our own nation cannot feed us. What does that make us? No one had an answer. One snowy afternoon, a work crew was clearing a road outside the camp when a group of American children approached. They were curious, bold, their cheeks red from the cold. One girl held out a candy bar, offering it through the wire to a Japanese prisoner. He froze. He had faced bombs, bullets, hunger. But the innocent gesture of a child terrified him more than any weapon. Slowly, he took the candy, bowed low, and said in halting English, "Thank you." The girl smiled and skipped back to her friends. That night, the man confessed to his bunkmates that he felt more broken by that small kindness than by all the battles he had endured. "A child of the enemy," he whispered, "gave me food with a smile. How can I hate her?" Such moments left scars of confusion. They didn't erase loyalty to the emperor, nor did they end the war inside their hearts. But they made the line between friend and foe blurrier than propaganda ever admitted. As 1945 pressed on, the men knew the war outside was reaching its climax. Rumors of bombings in Tokyo, of losses in the Philippines, trickled into camp. Each new report widened the contradiction. Inside the barbed wire, they lived with steady meals, shelter, even glimpses of humanity. Outside, their nation burned. The end of war. By summer of 1945, the world outside Camp McCoy had shifted beyond recognition. Whispers turned to headlines, carried in American newspapers that prisoners occasionally glimpsed through guards or Red Cross officials. The Allies were advancing. Cities in Japan were burning under waves of bombers. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki were struck, rumors raced through the camp, faster than guards could silence them. Most prisoners didn't fully understand what an atomic bomb was, but the horror of it bled through every word. Then came the truth they could not ignore. Japan had surrendered. The announcement fell over the camp like a weight no one could lift. Some prisoners stared blankly at the ground. Others wept in silence, their shoulders shaking under thin blankets. For years, they had carried the belief that their nation could not fall, that death was preferable to defeat. Now defeat had arrived while they were behind barbed wire, unable to lift a weapon, unable to choose their fate. Days passed in strange quiet. The guards did not gloat. They simply carried on with routines. Meals, roll calls, inspections. For many prisoners, that steadiness was unbearable. "They treat us the same," one man whispered bitterly. "Whether we are warriors or defeated, do they not see our shame?" But the camp was already preparing for repatriation. The Red Cross began organizing lists, transportation routes, schedules. Prisoners were given clean uniforms, medical checkups, and briefings about the journey ahead. They would be shipped back across the Pacific, not as soldiers of a victorious empire, but as survivors of a war their nation had lost. Going home. The departure was not triumphant. On the morning of transfer, prisoners filed out of their barracks carrying small bundles of belongings. Some clutched wooden carvings made during idle hours. Others carried carefully folded letters from home, stained with tears and sweat. As they passed through the gates, many glanced back one last time at the camp that had held them. It wasn't fondness that moved them, but confusion. The place where they had expected cruelty had instead given them hamburgers, Coca-Cola, blankets, and even glimpses of kindness. The journey home was long and heavy. On the ship, men huddled together, wondering what awaited them in Japan. Cities were gone, families scattered, hunger worse than when they left. They worried about being branded cowards, despised for having lived as prisoners. The guilt was sharp. But so was another memory they could not forget, the taste of that first meal in Camp McCoy. One man, scribbling in a worn notebook, wrote, "I thought my enemy would break me with politics. Instead, he broke me with food. I cannot erase the taste of bread, meat, and sweetness. It will follow me home like a shadow." When the prisoners finally stepped onto Japanese soil, reality struck hard. Bombed ruins stretched where cities once stood. Families met them with tears, relief, and sometimes bitterness. Some wives and children had survived on grass and tree bark. Others had not survived at all. The returning prisoners faced accusations of weakness, of dishonor, but in their silence, they carried stories no one at home wanted to hear. Stories of hamburgers and Coca-Cola, of Americans who treated them by rules instead of rage. In the years that followed, a few spoke cautiously about their time in America. They admitted it had forced them to see the enemy not as monsters, but as men. Others never spoke at all, burying the memories under layers of duty and shame. Yet even in silence, the contradictions lived on. The lasting legacy, the legacy of Camp McCoy and other camps like it, is not found in battles or victories, but in those quiet, disorienting moments when food, kindness, and order collided with fear and loyalty. For the prisoners, captivity revealed something uncomfortable but undeniable. Humanity could exist even in the middle of war. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Wars end. Nations rise and fall. But the small choices, a guard sharing a photograph, a child offering candy, a cook sliding a hamburger across a counter, can leave marks that outlast the noise of cannons. For those Japanese prisoners, the taste of Coca-Cola and the grease of a hamburger became symbols of contradiction, but also of survival. They reminded the men that even enemies can show mercy, and that sometimes mercy cuts deeper than hatred. As one prisoner told his son years later, "I learned in America that kindness is harder to carry than cruelty. Cruelty you can fight, kindness you remember. War can strip men of everything, but it cannot erase the power of small acts of humanity." And that is the story worth remembering. If you found this story meaningful, make sure to subscribe for more true accounts of World War II history. These stories, though buried in time, still speak to us today. They remind us of the choices humans make in the darkest hours, choices that reveal who we really are.